Hello everybody, my name is Nick. I guess if you're listening to this you probably know my name is Nick. But I wanted to vlog today about death and supporting people that are facing their mortality and death. So we are all dying from the day we are born, we are dying. And it is the one fact that most of us try not to think about too much. And indeed, if we have to spend most of our time trying to avoid, dodge, or fight it. Indeed, what do we hear most people say when they are given a diagnosis of a life-limiting and life-threatening disease? I'm going to fight it. We hear those words so often. Now, in many cases, that is perfectly reasonable and perfectly doable. But in many cases, it's not. And sometimes the fight is not ours to win. And mortality is very real. And we all have an end date for our time in this world. And who knows what happens thereafter? None of us actually know. So it's a very personal thing. And I think what I want to talk about is how best we can support somebody facing the end of life. And I don't think we need to have an agreement really on what comes thereafter, because we can't, because we don't know. So to give some context, I am a soul midwife. So in the way that a midwife would bring a soul into the world, soul midwives work helping souls to depart the world. And my role, I guess the best way I often describe it, if I'm trying to be succinct, is really a professional listener. That's really my job, is to sit and to be able to hold a very, very, very psychologically safe space, a confidential space, a quiet space, a space that allows somebody to be able to process what it is that they are able to process. And really the ultimate objective of soul midwifery is to enable people to have the most peaceful death possible. Now that's obviously very different for different people, because people have very different lives. People are very different, and therefore it's a bit of a paradox, because we all have different deaths and we all have the same death. So ultimately we all die, but the way that we get to that point and how that might feel can be hugely unique and individual for each person. So that may be a bit of a simplification, but let's if we may, let's go with that for now. Soul midwives do a whole range of holistic things to enable that peaceful death. So a lot of soul midwives do a lot of holistic therapies. I personally, in terms of the work I do, I tend to be the listener. It's the emotional and the psychological support that I really hope I bring to people facing end of life, and also their families. And one of I've observed a few things. I mean, I learned so much. It's such a privileged position to be in, to be with somebody as they take their final journey in this world, is a hugely intimate, privileged, at times very, very beautiful, and also very sad process. It is sad, because we love people and we care for people, and fundamentally we are made to survive and to live, and I don't think that as a society we have really spent very much time trying to understand or develop a relationship with death, because we find it very scary. It's the big unknown, isn't it? It's the big thing. And I actually think the irony is that in order to have very full and meaningful lives, in order to really understand how to seize the day, and when we say, that we're only here once, or we think we're only here once, because actually I don't know what the answer to that is, but there is something about how profound it is that we only really understand the essence of time and how important time is when we are actually running out of time. And therefore I do think in order to die well, we have to live well. And the more and the sooner we can start having conversations and a relationship with death, I think the more fulfilling our lives can be, because I think it really brings it home to us. So one of the things I definitely find doing the work I do is that I no longer put things off. You know, if I want to spend time with my loved ones and my friends, if I want to say things to people, if I want to do things, you know, today is as good as it gets, because who knows, there is a randomness to life that is inexplicable, and therefore, yeah, it's, excuse me 1 minute, my dog's just trying to steal my cup of tea. So the observations that I have made are as follows, really. So it seems to me that we're all a little bit like an oil painting. So an oil painting starts off with, you know, a very blank canvas, and over time the layers of the oil painting build up as a picture starts to emerge of what the painter is painting. This is a metaphor. And indeed, sometimes when the picture's finished, the painter might not like it, and he might paint over the whole oil painting and start all over again. And I think there are a lot of parallels between that and our lives. And I've definitely noticed that it's really, really helpful for people when they are facing end of life to be able to rerun the story of their life, to go through it, to process it, to take a look, to take stock, to understand the wounds that may still be there, that need to have some love and time and attention and healing. Maybe to identify those wounds which will always be their cherished wounds, that it's not possible to heal. Maybe to remind themselves of the joy and the value that they experienced, all kinds of different reasons. But the only way to enable people to do that is, because when we first meet somebody, we always see the top layer of the oil painting. We don't see the layers beneath. It is beyond our knowledge. And I found that when you're in a difficult situation, and sometimes it is very difficult when you're sitting with people facing end of life. It's very difficult to know, you know, what should I say? Am I going to say the wrong thing? It's actually far easier to talk than it is to listen. And I think it's a real skill that I am constantly learning, and I constantly have to remind myself to do, which is just to hold that space. So, you know, obviously you need to start a conversation, and maybe it's as simple as, how has today been? And the really important thing, I think, is just to be able to give the person the time and the space to be able to replay things. And it doesn't matter how many times they're replayed, because actually each time something's replayed, I've generally found there's a nuance or a different perspective or something else that's just come out there that needs to see the light of day. And I think it's really hard for us as humans, because death is the thing we can't solve, we can't stop. And we automatically, when our friends come to us and talk to us about, you know, problems or frustrations, it's really, really difficult actually for us not to step in solution mode, which often can come over as unsolicited feedback or judgment. And it's not that that's coming from a place of ill intent, but was, oh, you know, have you thought about this? Why don't you try this? And actually, a lot of the time, people just need a safe space to be able to talk about stuff. And that is, the truest I've ever seen of that situation is when people are facing their end of life. It is really, really important not to interrupt, and to allow them the space and the psychological safety and the encouragement to be able to go on with their story. So it may be that there are, you know, encouraging questions or questions of clarification, you know, I might step in with. But ultimately, my aim is to create that space for them to be able to keep going, to keep peeling back those layers of their oil painting, so that they can have a good look in all of the different areas, and actually find a way to make peace, or to hold their cherished wounds close to them, and to allow themselves to grieve and process what it is that they need to process. And I found that's so important. And I think that is why I actually say, really, I'm a professional listener. And I think one of the most underrated parts in our society of the process of dying and end of life is the ability to simply be the active listener when people are facing that, and to provide, to find a way to be able to provide that environment, that space. And you know, I found that it needs to be quiet, without interruptions, without people walking in and out. People need to feel safe. They need to feel that they're talking in confidence. They need to feel that people aren't overhearing them. They're not interrupting them, not jumping in and trying to second guess what they're saying. It's really, really important to hold that space. And I think it is an absolutely critical part of the emotional and the psychological processing that we need to go through to be able to get to a place where we can face the process of death as best as we can, which is different for different people. And the other thing I've found is we're taught as soul midwives to look at death through the 4 elements, and the 4 elements are earth, water, fire, and air. So earth is so in life. Let me just step back a minute. In life, those cycle of elements you are constantly going around, constantly. You know, every day I can see myself going through those elements. But when you are coming to end of life, each of those elements is actually withdrawing. It's no longer a circle. They are withdrawing. So the first is earth, and this is about our physicality, being very grounded, maybe our mobility, maybe you know, our appetite, how much we eat, how physically well we are, how independent we are, you know, our balance. So it's a very grounding, earthing component. And you often see with people getting to end of life that they may lose their appetite, become very frail, perhaps become bedbound, less mobile, or all kinds of things around the physicality. In actual fact, Catherine Mannix, who's one of my huge role models, a palliative care doctor turned author who is doing so much in this space to help us understand. She has this brilliant thing she shared the other day, which said, people aren't dying because they're not eating. People are not eating because they're dying. And this is one of the really big things I see. And I remember going through it. It was excruciating with my own father. We were so desperate to get him to eat. Come on, Dad. Do you fancy this? Do you want this to eat? And it's the body is closing down. The body is needing less calories. It's needing, you know, it's doing less and it's needing less. It is slowly closing down and pulling away from all of the things that have nourished it and keep it going. And actually, really, had I known what I know now then, it would have probably been far kinder to be able to say to my dad and to say to our loved ones, it's okay. If you don't want to eat, it's fine. You know, not eating, it's because they are dying that they don't want to eat. That is a natural part of the death process, but we're not educated on that. We don't know about it, right? So I found that hugely helpful. That's the earthing stage. The water stage, as you might imagine, water flowing can be very emotional, lots of tears, lots of very deep, emotional, revealing sadness, grief. And I do see that a lot in the water stage, a grief of things that somebody may no longer be able to do, things that, you know, you have to give up. And we talk about, you know, grief in our society, managing grief. And generally, you know, a lot of grief counselling and support comes in at the point at which somebody dies. And actually, I think part of the psychological and emotional journey for somebody facing end of life is grief starts much earlier. The person who is dying is grieving. They are grieving from the minute they realise the clock has been put on. And their grief is very, very acute because they are leaving everything and everyone they know, and they don't know where they're going. They don't know what this other thing may or may not be. So grieving for me starts much earlier, and actually starts with the person who's dying. So that's the water stage. And in the water stage, that's often where a lot of the wounds, and what I would call cherished wounds, which are really deep wounds, are often brought to the surface. And it's important, another thing is with water, right? If you don't let water flow, it will stagnate. And I think that's the best thing I held on to. You have to let water flow. You have to. So let it flow. It's okay for people to cry. You know, I often cry with people because, you know, sometimes stuff is really sad. And I'm a human being, and that's our connection. And when wounds are very deep and what I would call cherished wounds, that always involve someone or something for which people have had a great deep love for. Ultimately, there is love there, in whatever form. For mortal, we talk about fire. Fire is fire. It's really fiery, angry, agitated. Very often, in more medical terms, they might talk about terminal agitation. And again, as with letting water flow, you need to let fire burn. And that's not about telling people to calm down or try and shut it down. For me, I think it's very much about allowing that fire to be fiery, being able to hold a space where I can be next to the hot fire, but not be burnt by it. And eventually that fire extinguishes itself. It burns everything. Once it has burnt all the material it has to burn, you can move through that phase. And then, from fire comes air. And as you can imagine, air is peace. Air is a beautiful ethereal stage. It's the last stage, and it's often the shortest stage I've observed, where our physicality, we've withdrawn. People are very often unconscious a lot of the time, and they look like they're sleeping. Their breathing can become slower and more laboured, and I think what I always think is any conversations that need to be had, people's hearing is absolutely there until the end, but any conversations and two-way interactions that need to be had really needs to take place before the air stage. What I have found in the air stage is people, there's no two ways about it. Definitely, I would say they've heard me talking to them in my experience, and also touch is massively important in terms of that reassurance that you are there, but also not having too many intrusions, things like bright lights, loud noises, lots of stuff going on. It kind of, it's at odds with the ethereal nature of that stage, and that stage is very much about people who are going on their onward journey. They're detaching from the human world, so it's not really in their interest to constantly try and bring them back to that human world, because they have to go. And that is where our empathy, our pure empathy, needs to step in, because we have to allow that to happen, and we have to recognise how heartbreaking and how sad. I'm nearly crying thinking about some of those experiences, but this is the nature of life, and we have to feel able and to be able to step forward and give people the permission to go. And again, I wish I'd known that when my dad was dying, because I think he had to almost kind of turn off and run, because we were never going to give him permission to go, because we didn't understand any of this. So that's hopefully, I'm hoping that is of help, because I know that had I known these things when we were losing our father, who we loved so deeply and still do, I think it would have helped us. I think understanding the process of death, understanding a lot of the things that happen along the way, just alleviates so much anxiety and so much pressure that we put on ourselves. Are we doing the right thing? They haven't eaten. Should we might get them to eat some food? The fire stage in terminal agitation. Actually, one of the best bits of advice I got, actually, my dad was dying, and he was seeing agitators. A lovely friend and GP, who's a GP, said, check the pulse. If somebody is in real discomfort and pain, their pulse will always be racing. And I wish I'd known that sooner. And the reason I'm sharing all of this is I think it is hugely important for us to start thinking about having a relationship and being more educated on death, because I genuinely think it will reduce our fear, our anxiety, and I think it will help us to be able to support others better and actually support ourselves better. And most importantly, a lot of the stuff that I'm learning and I'm observing with end of life, my end of life experience is hugely beneficial to life. So I think I hope I'm becoming a far better friend in terms of learning to be more of an active listener, rather than stepping in and trying to solve things or tell people what to do or interrupting because that's an uncomfortable conversation and I don't have a solution. Therefore, let's talk about something else and cheer ourselves up. Well, maybe let's not. Maybe let's just hold that space. And I think that's what my job is. It's to be a listener in a space which sometimes can be very difficult to be in, but is also a very necessary thing for us to be in and learn about. I think in order for us to be more compassionate, more empathetic, and more I'm trying to search for the word, menopausal moment, more intentional in the way we live, because time is not here. Our time is not forever. So we have to be really discerning and really intentional with the way we live, because we don't want to look back and have missed the opportunity to do so. I hope that's of help. Thanks for listening.